lots and lots of jobs added in the South. But however, there is another reality that we don't hear quite as much about. It's starting to get some ground. It's starting to permeate a bit more. But the idea that many jobs go unfilled due to lack of skilled workers is a parallel story to what we see with the touting of new jobs everywhere. So here we see jobs going unfilled, especially in rural areas. Labor shortage in Illinois, we see from a variety of sources and a variety of times. Here in Kentucky, where we have a really robust Chamber of Commerce, they did a study a few years ago, a survey of numerous businesses in Kentucky, more than 1,000 in fact, participated in the Talent Gap survey by Kentucky's Chamber of Commerce. And while 81% of those employers expected growth in the next 3 to 5 years, 77% were having trouble finding skilled workers. And of the 35% of employers currently partnering with education and training providers, 70% said, well, we would now consider a partnership to help address the lack of skilled candidates. So, in fact, the largest gap for skills is in the entry to mid-level skills job, and that's our student population. Now, we know that skills, and that term is thrown around a lot. We're going to talk about that in a different contexts today, but we know that skills have changed. What's required of our students has changed over the years. In fact, in 1973, only 28% of jobs required post-secondary education, meaning some college or a degree, but that's a number that has crept up drastically over the past 40 years. And it's projected that in 2020, which is next year, and the same for 2024. At least 65% of all jobs will require some post-secondary education, whether that's a certificate, diploma, degree, etc. But the problem is we don't necessarily have a skilled workforce in order to meet the demand of these jobs that are going to be opening, stay open, and require these skills. A 2012 survey done of first world countries showed that 36 million Americans were underskilled in numeracy and in literacy, the bottom half in literacy and the bottom quarter in math. And worse yet, 24 million of that 36 million were currently employed. So these were individuals who couldn't even necessarily perform the skills needed to advance in their jobs. And it's also important to note that this data is now over 5 years old. So the unfortunate reality is that these numbers are worse today than they were. I more typically see 40 million Americans now in the underskilled for literacy. And 92% of executives, however, feel that soft skills are more important than academic skills. So what do we do with all of this? Well, first of all, the cost of underskilled workers is an expensive one. In fact, in 2013, employers spent 25 times as much on training their either current employees or new incoming employees to make sure they had the skills needed for the job, whereas the federal government was spending $17 billion. So think about that. That's $450 billion that's not being spent on our communities or invested in industrial expansion, new job creation. That's money being spent to make sure that employees have the skills needed to do the jobs that they either have or just get chosen for. There's an additional expense with this as well. For every 3 months that one position remains open in a single company or employer, the company loses $14,000 per open position. So again, currently in my state of Kentucky, 85% are hiring full-time and 77% report the inability to locate qualified workers. If those trends aren't reversed, then this economic boom that we've been seeing and this job creation we've been seeing has the potential to look vastly different. So then enters contextualized instruction. And what this really means for us today is the seamless teaching of academic skills, which we have in a real-life work-ready context through the use of authentic materials. So it's still a threefold three-piece, if you will, puzzle for things that we're doing here in adult education now. So academic skills, that's still our primary responsibility. But we're also including soft skills for students to learn and practice in our classrooms. And we're using work activities, authentic things to help prepare them for what they'll see in the workplace and in college. So skills are truly the currency of today. We know that high school equivalency isn't necessarily a ticket to middle class life anymore, but if we can prepare them for the skills they'll need beyond that very important stepping stone that they'll hopefully get from us, then they'll be in a position that is far superior to their peers, many others who may be interested in work as well. Now, this is kind of old news by this point, but if you're new to adult education, this might be new to you. And sometimes we're still a little fuzzy on what exactly WIOA, you've probably heard, is. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act was actually created as a result of that 2012 survey that showed that America lacked skills, academic skills in particular, when compared with other first world countries. So WIOA works to strengthen alignment among adult education, so us, along with post-secondary education and employers. And there are 7 different elements of WIOA, but we'll see some commonalities when looking at all of these. So we want to work up front with employers to identify regional hiring needs, increased collaboration with business and industry. We also see work-based earning opportunities and learning opportunities with internships, training for current workers, educator and employee models with education institutions. We also see data that drives accountability. So we are using regional and local job data to then define our training offerings, and regional occupational trends are being kept up with. That's one thing that's kind of new as a result of WIOA. I used to try to find updated statistics for my students as far as what jobs were available. And sometimes I would be looking at things that were several years old. And that's more or less stopped as a result of WIOA. Measuring and evaluating employment earning outcomes also is helping to update that data and making it available to the public. We're seeing more seamless progression from one educational stepping stone to another through things like career pathways, which we'll touch on briefly. We want to see education and career counseling of sorts for all. So more transparency on guidance for students as they progress through their educational journeys. And then ultimately regional collaborations between educators, one-stops, labor bureaus, government agencies. So we can kind of boil this down to 2 different categories. We're seeing an increase in workplace skills being taught in the classroom and an increase in partnerships outside of it. And these work nicely together as we help prepare students. Now, soft skills, which is what we're mainly here to discuss today, can usually be categorized in 4 C's, as I like to call it. So soft skills, 21st century skills, emotional intelligence, however you call it, whatever you choose to use word-wise. We still see the 4 C's of communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. Because being a well-rounded employee often requires multiple demonstration of soft skills at one time, so you'll often see an overlap of these skills. But we'll talk about choosing skills that then work in tandem with what your classroom activities are, will give you even more bang for your buck and make this a seamless and painless process. Now, communication comes first in the 4 C's. Because without communication skills, all other soft skills would be pointless, really. But communication isn't always easy, we know. In fact, a 2013 survey of employers found that 60% of them said that college graduates don't have the communication skills needed for workplace success, so that's a little scary. But here's some elements of communication that you can include and should look for in your students. And we'll look at activities and assessments in a moment as ways to both teach and then assess these things in students. Verbal and nonverbal communication is a big one, a good place to start. With the recognition, sometimes the message we intend to send is not the message that is received. And this is news to people sometimes. We also want to be sure our students have active listening skills, that they can think critically about what they hear, including inferring meaning and identifying fallibility of information when necessary. We also want to be sure we have students who recognize audience-specific needs and then make adjustments as needed. So adjusting language based on who they're talking to and so on. And finally, we want students who can utilize media to enhance communicative ability. We certainly have a population that is very media heavy, to say the least. And however, there's sometimes a disconnect between whether or not the media is enhancing the message or not. So that's a good skill for students to learn, and one that employers feel very strongly about. Now, employees must work together or collaborate in nearly every single work environment these days. And in our always on, always connected world, employers are looking for candidates who are team players, no matter the level of work. So these are the skills that can help students demonstrate collaboration. Again, as I promised, we see communication there. We want to be sure they can communicate with each other, but they also appreciate and value the ideas and work of others. And they give and receive critical feedback. This is a big one, both giving and receiving feedback as they work toward a common goal. Employers want employees who are flexible, that they're able to take one for the team at the expense of self-interest. They're able to change when needed to change. This is a big one that employers say is lacking in the current, in fact, workforce. And they need to be able to assume a role in a team. And not only that, but then to provide a valuable contribution. So collaboration, working as a team is a big one. Critical thinking, the other national deficit. We want to be sure we have students who can analyze data, and the key part of that is void of emotion or opinion. So they have reasoning skills. We want students who can appreciate the viewpoints and validity of others, to recognize ideas that aren't their own. They need to be able to systematically solve problems. You know, as we looked at so many of these new careers that are popping up as a result of technology in various industries, it's not just as simple as fixing one thing that won't then impact 85 other steps in the process. So systematic problem solving is a very important soft skill. And then students that can hopefully delineate parts from the whole. How do we look at one part of this and how it's affecting everything else? So 73% of executives polled said that critical thinking skills are null and void for job applicants. So these are skills that if our students can learn and possess these, again, they'll be better off than their counterparts. And lastly, creativity and innovation. So creativity is often left off the list of soft skills for adult learners, leaving 3 C's, I guess. But I include it because employers are also looking for creative problem solvers, candidates who will embrace ingenuity. So being sure your students have opportunities to contribute in new ways, think about problems differently, and then recognize challenges as opportunities can be really helpful for them. So creativity involves, again, kind of critical thinking, but thinking outside the box to solve a problem, not merely following a set of steps. They, again, can face a challenge as an opportunity and contribute in new ways of thinking and being in their workplace. So now then, what are some specific things you can do and incorporate in your classroom for each of these C's? Now, communication requires that students do more than sit and get in your classroom, of course. And this can sometimes be a struggle, though, in adult classrooms. Sometimes our students are hesitant to open up and share with each other or with you. But we want to encourage speech first as far as communication goes. Speak up, speak out, and join the conversation. But it can also involve other forms of communication, like emailing assignments, online platforms, and how to communicate using proper manners in online platforms, and so on. And it also involves a lot of modeling on your part to show students the many facets of communication. And these are just some of my favorite tools. I like a lot of role plays and scenarios to give students examples of how to versus how not to communicate. And we can get into some of those multiple platforms for communication. So if you have Google Classroom or Edmodo or a class blog, anything like that that communicates with students in a variety of ways is helpful. Sometimes it's a good idea to have democratic establishment of classroom procedures, and this covers so many of the soft skills, as you work together to define what it is that is acceptable behavior in the classroom and giving students a chance to start communicating about that. And as I mentioned, instructor modeling, and that'll show up in all of our soft skills here. Now, as far as collaboration, partnered activities are a good place to begin. We want to be sure students are working together frequently, but we don't just want to leave them necessarily to group up on their own. We'll want to strategically partner and group them to be sure the loudest mouth doesn't always just automatically take over. So I'm going to share with you here in a bit where to find some good templates and rubrics for students who have assigned roles and what they're working on. Group debates are another way to get students engaged with each other. And another hint with that is assign the side that they're supposed to be on. They don't get to choose based on their opinion. They're having to use facts and so on to actually communicate and work with their team to debate about it with another group. So assigning roles can be really helpful to make sure students also have the experience of having led something, having been the recorder for it, having been the timekeeper, and so on. And then project-based learning activities are great for collaboration. Anytime students can work together on a common project, they're collaborating and gaining some really valuable insight. Now, critical thinking is well reflected in classrooms where the college and career readiness standards have truly taken root. But being intentional about fostering critical thinking of students can be a little daunting. So ask lots of questions. First and foremost, if you're wondering where to start and how am I teaching critical thinking, asking lots of questions can be the best way to start that process and help students to connect the content that they're learning with new ways to think and see. So deductive reasoning is one of those critical thinking types of activities that you can do, where they have to work backwards sometimes and see different steps. Point of view analysis. We see this heavily in our ELA classrooms, especially when it comes to texts, but that's a critical thinking skill. You can always do a think aloud modeling and problem solving sets to get students to see inside your brain and how it works as you think critically through the process. And then emphasizing evidential versus emotional response. So kind of back to that opinion versus fact, making sure students are aware of, let's use the evidence here to show that you're right. And finally, that how and why questioning. How did you get the answer and why is it correct? These are all helpful strategies to get started with critical thinking. And finally, creativity and innovation that can help students really think outside the box. Mathematic manipulatives are helpful, a good place to start for students to get creative with problem solving. It's also helpful sometimes to have them engage in brainstorming activities about different issues before they dive in and go down one particular road, for instance. So brainstorming is a good way to get creativity flowing. And then projects with multiple outcomes. Things like that make me nervous personally, but it's a really good way to start thinking creatively. Well, what if these are all the different outcomes, how can I get there? Again, kind of thinking backwards. So those are all activities that you can use, ways of thinking for your students in your classes. And as far as how to assess soft skills, Well, there are informal rubrics and checklists. That's some of the things I'm going to show you where to find those at the end. That's my favorite way because it can be difficult sometimes to necessarily test, quote unquote, students on soft skills. But in your class, you can certainly use rubrics and checklists with different skills on them and see how students stack up. Instructor observation is, of course, important as well. You can always talk indirectly about behavior that you've observed or trends in your classroom. Maybe people are arriving late. Make a conversation about that. Turn that into an activity where students are thinking through the outcomes that would happen for that in the workplace. My favorite, though, soft skill assessment is student self-assessment. So when we talk about the roles that they have had assigned and the different expectations on those roles, which are included in some of those informal rubrics and checklists we'll see, and then asking students, hey, how'd you do? Would you hire you? Self-assessment, drawing students' attention to their own behavior, is a really valuable assessment tool. And ultimately, there are soft skills softwares. We just saw Burlington English has a variety of resources. We know that there are books that involve soft skills as well. So there are different softwares available too. In this day and age, there are lots and lots in adult education even, and that's a good thing. Now, as far as resources to use, so we've touched on the soft skills, but WIOA also says we need to engage in workplace preparation. That's beyond just soft skills. Here are some of my favorite, what I call authentic materials, because you're surrounded by these things. You can go out and purchase materials, but it can't get any more real than what you have in your own workplace even. So employee handbooks and job descriptions, which actually most job descriptions now list specific soft skills for the job at hand, which is helpful to point out to students. Memos and emails, things that you get every day. Incident reports, they can be particularly helpful for students who are looking at going into a hazardous occupation perhaps as well. Let's look at the job market analysis reports that I just said are kept more up to date these days. Let's look at those in our math classes and see what students can identify as trends, for instance. Public transportation or shift schedules. Those are definitely authentic materials that students will see frequently. And one that we could all sometimes use assistance with, our salary and benefits reports. When open enrollment comes around, I feel like I need a webinar every year to get caught up on what's changed in my health insurance. So those are all just a few of the many authentic resources that are available in our classrooms for our use. Now, as you're looking to integrate some of these soft skills things into your classes, I've just shown you some authentic materials, and I'm going to share with you at the end where to get some rubrics and checklists that are really valuable. But you can also start with the Oktay Framework. They have the soft skills framework on the Oktay website. The best way to find it is just to Google Oktay Employability Skills Framework. And it's an interactive tool. You can also print things. But it's interactive in that you can click on different areas of that, and it'll give you the skills needed that students will most need. And Oktay did a whole lot of research with that. It was a big partnership activity with many governing bodies as a WIOA effort. So the Oktay Employability Framework is a nice place to start also. Now, one question I get a whole lot is, well, so what does this mean? I hear contextualized instruction and I get confused because people use it in a lot of different ways. That's true. That's a good point. So here are the three main categories of what quote unquote contextualized instruction is. So first of all, workforce prep. So that's just plain old learning, practicing, and demonstrating soft skills primarily is workforce prep. Now, career pathways, though, is ABE and ASE instruction that's occupational specific as an introduction to a career cluster. And then the third level of that is integrated education and training, or IET. Now, what makes IET special most of the time is it's occupationally specific, but it's delivered concurrently with a post-secondary institution, sometimes an employer or a training provider, so that students gain something other than just high school equivalency. They're working toward another certification at the same time. So the key word with IET is partnership. There's some sort of formal partnership between the adult education program or class and another partner, usually post-secondary or an employer. Now, if you are here today and you're wondering, which am I? We are all workforce prep. WIOA makes it very clear that we all have to include soft skills and prepare our students for the workforce. However, we may not all be teaching in a career pathway situation or an IET situation, but these are the three main categories of contextualized instruction. And soft skills, workforce prep is part of all. Now, so if we look at career pathways for a moment, so along with the soft skills infusion, classroom activities that align to a career pathway, they just add another layer of contextualization for students. So the idea of a career pathway is that students can begin a pathway at any point and can exit the pathway for a time if they want to pursue a job, come back, gain more training, and so on. So for many students, the trailhead of career pathways will be in your learning center. But note, and helping students to see that it's not just a, here's my one goal and I'm going to get there in this manner, that there are different stops along the way, and that often those pathways can run concurrent with training and work. They don't always have to choose one or the other. And that can put a lot of students' minds at ease. So to begin effective career pathways, again, soft skills are the main component there for all of our classes. But you can also, with career pathways that keep in line with WIOA mandates, we have a lot of information about what our target sectors are for the different regions in which we live. So for instance, Kentucky alone has 6 different targets, I believe, and it's different state to state, but most of your states will have chosen 6 to 8 target sectors, meaning sectors of employment that they are focusing on growing in your state or maintaining, for instance. In many states, it's healthcare. Healthcare is on the list of every state that I work with, that's for sure. And manufacturing is usually up there pretty high too, because it's either fields that don't have enough staff or enough workers in place, so they're looking to pull more people into that pipeline, or sometimes it's an industry that already exists but that they're looking to grow to increase GDP and all of those good things. So there are 16 career clusters, and we can see little icons for each of those here, anything from finance to agriculture to marketing. But as a reminder, we're all workforce prep. We aren't necessarily all career pathways or all IET. That depends very much on your program. But if we can, we're going to give it a whirl. Lindsay's going to pull up a poll. I just want to do a little quick back and forth. There's a statement on each of these, and I want you to think back on the definitions we just learned of workforce, career pathways, or IET, and click and see which one would fall, which category would hold that. So for instance, number 1, we see planning a fictional company picnic. Would that be a classroom workforce prep activity, career pathways example, or IET? So I'm going to give you just a second to do those, and then we'll go through them. But see what you think. Now, Lindsay, I am not seeing the results of those, so I'm just going to go ahead and in about a minute, I'm going to hop in and review these, and you can, it's just kind of a fun quiz, if you will, to see if you got this right as a participant. So we'll go through them here in just a few seconds. All right, so the first I have was planning a fictional company picnic. That is a workforce prep activity because that doesn't have anything to do with a specific career cluster or doesn't involve a partnership with someone else. So that would be a good workforce prep activity that any student could do. The second, completing a certified nursing lab assistant session in a nursing home. That involves an employer partner, so that would be IET specifically. What about showing multiple steps for, whoops, there we go, for a, oh, now my poll's gone. Hold on, I can't see now. Oh, there it goes. Showing multiple steps for math solving problem. Yes, you all said workforce. That is correct. 4, creating a marketing campaign for a fictional hotel. Career pathways. It certainly could be. Yes, maybe you're in a career pathway classroom involving hospitality and tourism. That's true. It can sometimes be considered career pathways as well. Now, it's not IET because it's a fictional hotel. It doesn't involve a true partnership. Remember, partnership is the key word for IET. However, number 5, taking introductory welding at a technical college, that is IET. We see that partnership there. Number 6, working with others on a group project. Yes, 81% of you said workforce. That is correct. Calculating distance equals rate times time using trucking scenarios. Career pathways. Yes, students were perhaps in a transportation logistics class. So that would be an authentic use of that. Working on a robotics arm in a local factory. IET, that's correct, that we have that partnership with a local business. Number 9, learning about milliliters using medicine cups. That's career pathways because it doesn't involve a partnership again, but it's authentic learning about healthcare. And finally, typing an email to a teacher. Yep, workforce prep. Those are things all of our students can begin to do and utilize. So that's just a fun little quiz to help hopefully pull apart those 3 different sections that we sometimes get confused about when it comes to talking about contextualized instruction. So let me see. Trying to get my thing to, there it goes. Now, just to talk for a moment about partnerships, because they are for students to learn about what soft skills are needed in a certain job field, for instance. Ask your local business and industry and educational partners what they already need in soft skills employees or soft skills participants who are coming into their fields. What do they need? What do they see as lacking? You can also partner with career centers and see what particularly they do to provide assistance to students when it comes to the full gamut of contextualized instruction and access to your services. Another is counseling services, so helping students who don't know necessarily what it is that they want to be when they grow up, giving them access as they begin their educational journey. So partners can be a wonderful thing. And since WIOA says we have to partner, I find people are a lot more willing to work with adult education than they used to be. And that's wonderful. But it is important to remember that above all, just a reminder, academic skills are the largest part of your work, and they have to be. Where else are students going to get the skills that they need to be successful when it comes to academics? But that we also include soft skills and work activities as valuable parts to the puzzles that we have as well. So I have a few tools, and I'm going to show you where to find them here in a moment. One of them is my soft skills implementation diagnostic. So these are different elements of things you can have in a soft skills infused classroom and program. And you can kind of think about, what am I already doing? Because I promise you're already doing a whole lot more even than you think you are. So this can help to point out all of those things you're already doing really well. And then it can help pull forth those things that maybe you're not doing as much of and you want to up your game. So I have this for you here to kind of review some of the key parts to a solid soft skills implementation program. And today's presentation is just a snippet based off my book called Seamless, Soft Skills in the Classroom and Beyond. And I have an accompanying resource packet that I'm giving you access to. It's those downloadable tools I was just mentioning with the student assessment tools, as far as if they are assigned roles in a certain activity that you do. How did I do? What's expected of me as the leader? And then they can kind of think about how well they did. You as their instructor can also use that information as well. The soft skills diagnostic tool is in this resource pack also. So all of today's materials can be found at my website, which you see here on your screen, and that is scr.consulting. Yeah, that is the URL. So it's like scr.com, scr.consulting. And up at the top, there's a tab that says more, and you can go down to workshop materials and get all of the things that we've talked about today. And another place to find some of these things is my online professional development platform, where I have a much more extensive course than a 40-minute webinar involving seamless soft skills in the classroom and beyond, plus some other stuff on there too. So you might want to check that out. But where to find me, where to get in touch with me, my website is on there again. Here's my email address too. I would love to hear from you all. And you can find me on Twitter. That is my social media of choice. But I'd like to thank you again for attending today. Lindsay, I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A. So thanks so much to COABE for asking me to lead this today. And thanks to Burlington English for their sponsorship. And I appreciate all of you joining us.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan, for presenting today. As we close out this webinar, please take a moment to let us know your thoughts through the very brief poll that I'm going to share right now. We appreciate your input, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today.